So, how tall is the world's tallest mountain? It sounds like a pretty simple trivia question, right? Something we all think we learn in school. But believe me, the real answer, well, it's way more complicated and way more fascinating than you'd ever guess. Okay, let's not beat around the bush. Here's the number. 8,848.86 meters. That's the big one, the official agreed-upon height that was announced back in 2020. This is the number that was supposed to settle everything. But, case closed? Not even close. See, this number isn't the end of the story. It's actually the beginning of an amazing journey. We're talking history, geology, even global politics. How we got to this one number is a wild tale of scientific rivalries, immense geological forces, and a mountain that is, believe it or not, literally alive. Okay, so let's get into what we're calling the magic number. I mean, why is this specific number such a huge deal? Well, for decades, figuring out the true height of Everest wasn't just some fun fact. It was a serious, intense debate that had real consequences for the countries that share the mountain. Yeah, just listen to this quote from Nepal's ministers. This is a historic day. This survey will end debates on the height of Everest once and for all. You can just feel the weight lifting off their shoulders, right? This wasn't just about measuring something. This was a huge diplomatic achievement with China, using science to finally settle a really old disagreement. But to really get why that 2020 announcement was so massive, we've got to jump in our time machine and go way back. Because trying to measure Everest, or Peak XV, as they first called it, has been an absolutely monumental task for, wow, over a century and a half. And this is the man himself, Sir George Everest. Now, he was in charge of this just unbelievably ambitious project back in the 1800s called the Great Trigonometrical Survey of India. I mean, their goal was to map the entire subcontinent. And the craziest part, Everest probably never even laid eyes on the mountain. It was actually his successor who named it in his honor. So how on earth did they do it back then? Well, this gives you a clue. They used a technique called triangulation. Imagine teams dragging these heavy instruments called theodolites and just painstakingly measuring angles from one point to the next, creating this giant invisible web of triangles across hundreds of miles. We're talking brutal, dangerous work. And yet, the accuracy they achieved, it was just mind-boggling for the time. Okay, so this timeline really gets to the core of the whole problem. In 1855, we get that first number, 8,840 meters. Then, for basically 100 years, the 1954 number, 8,848 meters, was the number. Everyone just accepted it. But then, GPS comes along. In 99, a US survey says, hey, we think it's taller, 8,850. And then, in 2005, China drops a bombshell with a shorter measurement, which really kicked off a whole new kind of debate. So, what was that big debate all about? It boiled down to a surprisingly simple question. Are we measuring to the top of the snow or to the top of the actual rock under the snow? See, Nepal was all about the snow height, the bit that climbers actually stand on. But China argued, no, it should be the solid rock height. And for more than a decade, this meant you could climb the same mountain and get a certificate with a different official height depending on which country you asked. Kind of crazy, right? But the plot thickens. Because this whole debate, it wasn't just about how you measure it. The real twist is that trying to get one single permanent height for Everest is like trying to measure a kid who won't stop growing. The mountain itself isn't just a static chunk of rock. It's a dynamic, living, breathing thing. And this next part is maybe the most mind-blowing fact in this entire story. Get this. The very rock at the tippy top of Mount Everest, the highest place on planet Earth, was once sitting at the bottom of an ocean. Just let that sink in for a second. This ancient sea was called the Tethys Ocean. So you have to picture the Indian subcontinent just cruising north over millions of years. It eventually slammed into Asia, and in that colossal collision, the Tethys Ocean was squeezed shut and its seabed got pushed up, crumpled up like the hood of a car to form the Himalayas. And you might be thinking, how do we possibly know that for sure? Well, the proof is right there in the rock. Climbers and geologists have found fossils, actual fossils of ancient sea creatures near the summit. Things like trilobites and crinoids. These little guys lived and died on the ocean floor, and now their remains are sitting almost 9 kilometers up in the sky. It's just incredible. And that incredible process of uplift, it's still happening right now. The Indian plate is still shoving its way under the Eurasian plate, and that constant pressure is forcing the Himalayas to grow by more than a centimeter every single year. It's slow, sure, but it is absolutely relentless. But wait, there's more. It's not just that massive continental crash. Scientists have recently figured out there's a second, kind of surprising force at play that's giving Everest and its neighbors an extra little boost. It's a process called isostatic rebound. Okay, think of it like sitting on a really soft mattress. If someone next to you gets up, your side of the mattress lifts a little, right? It's the same idea. Rivers are constantly carving away millions of tons of rock and sediment, making the area lighter. And as that massive weight is removed, the Earth's crust sort of rebounds. It literally floats up a little higher on the molten mantle underneath. But here's the thing. What takes millions of years to build can shrink in a flash. We saw this with the devastating 2015 Nepal earthquake. All that built-up tectonic pressure was released in an instant, and scientists discovered that some of the Himalayan peaks actually dropped by as much as 60 centimeters. Just boom, gone in a matter of seconds. So that brings us full circle. We've got a mountain that grows, that shrinks, and that everyone was arguing about. So how did Nepal and China finally come together and agree on one single number? Well, the answer is a mix of super cool new tech and, honestly, a new willingness to just work together. This time, they threw the whole kitchen sink at it. They started with old-school surveying, bringing a baseline measurement up from the plains. Then they used gravity surveys to figure out where sea level actually is under the mountain, which is way more complicated than it sounds. At the summit, they used advanced satellite receivers for a super precise position. And here's the kicker, they used ground-penetrating radar to finally measure the snow depth, at last solving that whole rock versus snow fight. But you know what really made the difference? It was a true team effort. You had both Nepali and Chinese survey teams climbing the mountain. They pulled all their data from America's GPS, China's Beidou system, Europe's Galileo, everything. It was all about getting a number that was so solid, so well-researched that nobody could argue with it. So, they finally got their number. But why does a difference of a few meters or even centimeters matter so much? Well, because the height of Mount Everest is about way more than just a number on a map. It's about national pride, scientific prestige, and yeah, a lot of money. Just take a look at this. The cost to climb from the Nepal side versus the China side is really different. It's significantly cheaper to go from China. For a long time, one of Nepal's advantages was that its measurement was the one most people recognized. Now, with one unified height, the playing field for this massive, multi-million-dollar climbing industry has been totally leveled. You have to understand, for Nepal, Everest tourism is a vital part of the economy, especially for the people living in those rural mountain communities. Meanwhile, China is pouring money into its side, building a road right up to its base camp and even training its own guides. Agreeing on the height basically fires the starting gun on a whole new phase of economic competition. We're talking people's livelihoods and a huge piece of national identity. So here we are, back where we began, but with a totally new perspective. We have this number, 8,848.86 meters. It's a historic achievement of science and diplomacy, no doubt. But we also know that number is just a snapshot in time. The mountain is still growing from below and being worn down from above. Which leaves us with this final fascinating question. In a world that is constantly changing, what does it really mean to have a final measurement?